Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about vision for a borderless Africa. This is not my vision. It is just a reflection of what's already happening. So before I jump in, I want to give you a little bit of a background on myself. As the gentleman mentioned, my name is Yoseph. I am from Ethiopia. Grew up between Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, and a little bit in Nigeria. And the internet changed my life. I learned most of the world and a lot of things online in internet cafes, paying per minute, internet access. Even learned most of my English online. But the internet is very gated, and the world is very gated for an Ethiopian. So I got a scholarship to study at Harvard, moved to the Bay Area to work in tech, but then I was kicked out of the US because my education and my degree did not match in a government database that was made in 1990s. So I decided to move to New Zealand and experiment with new visa programs and created something new to help build a borderless world, basically hacking the nation-state apparatus to help greater human movement. But then I discovered crypto and Web3, and a lot of that made a ton of sense to me, and it did so through the African context. And that's what we're going to unpack today. So I'm going to start off with a bold statement, is that in all the work we're all doing in Web3, we actually need Africa to reach our full potential. We are about 5, 10, sometimes 15% of the world working in this space. But if we're talking about mass adoption, if we're talking about real-world use cases, people using these technologies and primitives for their daily lives, the masses are not with the technologies that are being built. The masses are in parts of the world that are huge and massive. And Africa is a big part of that. So let's unpack that. First of all, Africa is a frontier market. I don't believe in this concept of a developing market because developing assumes a linear, predetermined path. There's no absolute way that the whole continent of Africa is going to follow a 200-year path that the West has followed to reach where it's at today. Why is that? Because Africa is transforming so fast right now, and there are 4 main tectonic shifts that is driving that. We'll break this down in pieces. Let's look at the demographic changes. So Africa is 1.4 billion people today. Just to give you context of that, that is all of Europe, all of South America, and all of the United States combined as one. But that's not it. In the next 20-something years, we're going to add 2 whole Europes to the continent of Africa. And today, the median age is 19. And more than 75% of our population is under 35. It's very, very fast growing. Here you'll see a chart of a breakdown of different age groups. The bottom is the youngest and the top is the oldest people. You'll see sort of a change between even some of the major regions in the world. Africa is going to be very young. In the next 20 or so years, more than a quarter of all the world's population is going to be in Africa. So that massive demographic change is having ridiculous transformation on the continent. Second piece, internet. Access to information flow. That is growing really fast. As I told you, the internet changed my life, and it's doing that for a whole lot of young people who are accessing more online and learning more on YouTube than what they're learning in universities and local schools. And that is very transformative. More than 2/3 of all developers on the continent are self-taught or learning on the job. So the information technology and access to information is ridiculously changing how we see the world. The other bit is technology access and new paradigm technologies is also helped us leapfrog generations of institutions. So we did not spend decades trenching the grounds across our entire continent to build landline cables to be able to communicate to each other. We jumped straight into mobile. We didn't spend decades building the JP Morgans of this world for Africa and putting ATM machines in every corner. We jumped straight to mobile money. And as you can see, more than 70% of the entire global money market is in Africa. we'll talk more about the challenges of the financial institution, but we are not waiting for the gated financial system to slowly reach the needs of the African population. So a lot of Africans are jumping into crypto. We've seen $100 billion of on-chain transactions last year, and it's growing really fast. The other area is that we have big institutional vacuums. More than like about 500 million Africans don't even have any form of legal ID. 40 countries in Africa don't print our own money. We get like printing companies in Europe printing it and shipping it to us, and we pay 6% of the total money supply to the printing press and for just shipment alone. And there are a whole lot of African countries that were colonized by France, and as a result of that, they are on this what's called the CFA, the French Colonies of Africa currency, which kind of constitutes that 50% of all the income you get from outside the world goes to the French treasury. And any type of infrastructure development, mining, whatever you want to do at scale, the French government or French companies get first right of refusal. So these types of challenges and so many more are basically creating an open landscape for innovation and for creativity. So with all this in mind, I believe that Africa is very ripe for decentralization. That's because centralization is failing us. I have conviction that if we stick with the status quo, Africa's position at the bottom of the pyramid is pretty much locked in for the next at least 100 years. And that's not good enough. And this is not ideological, it's very practical. People like myself and a number of people who are here have been able to find like little loopholes or scholarships or whatever to get out and access the rest of the world. But 900 million young Africans want as much of the world as all of us have it, and centralized systems are not giving that to them. So they are thirsty, they are hungry, they want to be part of building this world like all of us. And I believe that a huge part of what we're working on here with decentralized technologies offers a big part of that solution. Predatory financial systems today are holding us back in a massive way. For example, in order to send money from Ethiopia to Kenya, which are neighboring countries, money has to go all the way to Europe and the US and back in US dollars, which none of us actually use for daily lives. And we pay about 10% fees for the Western Unions and MoneyGrams and all these different institutions. We pay $5 to $10 billion on SWIFT fees alone as a continent. And in order to access credit, most regular people pay about 10 to 27%, in some cases even 1% a day interest, just to borrow a little bit amount of money to buy inventory or to order things to do work. And as many people in Latin America also face, many Africans have very high inflation rates. 600 million Africans are with 20 to 30% inflation rates. So even when we look at stablecoins, I believe stablecoins have found their US dollar stablecoins, they've found the best product market fit in Africa. Because in many countries, you can access US dollar stablecoins much easier and faster than you can access fiat dollars. The other drive towards decentralization is that trust. Trust is my view, is one of the best things that the blockchain solves for, and that's one of the biggest gaps that we have across many African countries. Asking the question, will you do the thing you say you're going to do? Are you who I think you are? Do you have what you say you have? Is that piece of land yours? Is someone going to steal that money? Are you going to drive me to where this app says you're going to drive me to? The friction cost of trust is so high. Something that I've actually been trying to track myself is how much time and headspace do I spend when I'm in a number of different African countries, basically trying to establish trust. And when trust is negotiated, it really slows us down. And that's the beauty of trustless technologies, is that we can actually function without needing to really trust each other and being the vetter of trust at multiple different levels. So this is one of the most transformative areas that I believe Africa is really tapping into this space. The other area which is very close to my heart why decentralization matters is borders. I believe borders is a big enemy for the thirst and hunger and drive many African, especially young people, have. And I think what decentralization creates is a space for a borderless economy. So let's put that in a very practical lens. So if you invited 100 African builders to come here with African passports, I can almost guarantee you less than 5 will be able to actually get a visa to come here and physically attend this event. We don't have many African builders and community builders attending most ETH global events. I just got a New Zealand passport a few years ago, and like nothing about me changed, but overnight the whole world opened up, and it wasn't the case before. Even to try to fly from one place to another, transiting through one country, some folks have to wait 6 months just to get a transit visa so the plane you're on can land in that country. So when the world is heavily gated like this, it really kind of, it breaks the possibility for people to be able to move around the world. And decentralized technologies are giving us access to what's now a borderless economy. I can participate in a global economy, I can work, build community, collaborate, and do all the things that I want to do without having to leave home and without missing home-cooked food. And I think that's a big transformative aspect of what we're building here. So where does Ethereum play a role in this? I believe we have a big role to play in the African story. Why is that? Because if we really break down the core values of the Ethereum revolution of movement, I believe that's extremely aligned. We talked about decentralization. Well, centralized players are failing us. We talk about permissionlessness. Well, permission world is not working for us. We talked about trustlessness. Well, we don't have trust infrastructure, so that is a really great fit. We talk about sovereignty. Well, we don't have sovereignty because if we have foreign powers controlling our monetary system, it's not even just individuals, but even nation states are fighting for sovereignty, right? So I think there's multiple layers of values alignment that exist here. So how do we really build this beautiful partnership between the Ethereum community and the massive emergence and frontier work that is happening across the continent? I'm going to leave you with some sort of first principle thoughts and ways to approach it, as opposed to just do ABCD and magic will be created. So let's flesh what that looks like. First is approach Africa with a different mindset. Too often we have many people kind of saying, oh, well, let us build an X for Africa. Let us just, we build this beautiful, amazing thing. Let's have a marketing team there, just help us grow and scale and whatever. I don't think that's going to work because the variables we optimize for are very different from those in the West, including the East as well. We have very different constraints and very different variables we're working around. So some very tangible examples. How many of you here use feature phones? No one. So, oh, you do, okay. No, okay, no one. So if no one uses feature phones, then you wouldn't be able to actually do a user experience test for the majority of African users. Here we have ATM machines in every corner. Well, in many African countries, the ATM machines are actually not machines. They're little kiosks with a human behind them who does basically like onboarding and offboarding into crypto tools, as well as mobile banking, as well as selling chewing gum, as well as selling so many other things. And those are like the merchant networks that basically run the grassroots financial institution of many countries. So how on earth are you actually going to embed that into a tool that you're building and scaling in other markets? It's not going to work. So you have to like really see the world through the local builders lens and through the local communities and the variables that we are working around. So one of the best ways to do that is to show up and spend time there and connect with people and listen and understand. And one of the things that I helped lead in February is with a number of Ethereum community folks, including Vitalik, Aya, and a number of other people. We did a trip across 4 African countries, just listening, learning, having roundtable conversations, and building mutually respectful conversations and relationships. And that was really amazing because it creates opportunities for 2 ways of learning. Now, with Ethereum, Mainnet is just not accessible in Africa because we're very transaction cost sensitive. No one is going to spend $5 for a $1 transaction, right? So that's just not, Mainnet hasn't been scalable. But now with layer 2s and ZK technologies and all other experiments that are happening to build on top of Ethereum's security layer, that is making Ethereum a lot more accessible and reachable to the continent. So that's one of the areas that we see there. And the last bit I'd say here is that we've got to think long term. So if you're kind of thinking, how do we work with 1 billion people or 2.8 billion people that is coming ahead, that is a massive, massive, massive market. And Africa is 54 countries. It's not one country, multiple different contexts and regions. So you got to play a long-term game. And that's an area where, unfortunately, many other protocols and projects keep failing at, is because they're focused so much on what they can get right now, and they get in the trap of just short-term KPIs as opposed to actually building partnership and being part of the bigger transformation that is happening. The second first principle for Ethereum showing up and doing well in Africa is participating in soil building. We talk about creating the infinite garden. Well, the infinite garden needs rich soil, and we need to participate in helping build that rich soil. Well, that's the question of then what conditions do we need to have in place for builders to rise and address the problems that they're facing in their communities. We've got to weave different ecosystems, focus on grassroots community building, events, meetups, like the type of stuff that's happening here. These things matter because they create the fertile soil for beautiful trees and forests to fully thrive. And that's a critical part of the foundational work I think we need to do. I want to just give a few shout-outs on that context. There are a number of events that are happening on the continent. There is Eid Safari happening in Kenya this September, 18 to 24. You're all invited. It will be fun to see you all there. There's Eid Accra. A small number of folks are organizing a hackathon in Accra, Ghana. I believe it's early September. Some of us have met the Afropolitan crew. They're creating a community of a lot of African diaspora and people on the continent who are basically sharing knowledge and creating ways of building magic together. One project I'm really passionate about is Web3 Bridge. They're doing very grassroots level of talent development, primarily training people with Solidity and embedding them into Ethereum values over in Nigeria. And sort of like projects like these, and there's so many more out there, that is basically doing the soil building. And so if you want to really help be part of that, then connect with them, support them. The last thing around showing up is that there are certain points of tension that exist. And I think sometimes instead of resolving them, it's best to just sit with the discomfort of it. One of it is the tension between globalization and localization. So there's a version of this story that says, hey, well, if US dollar stablecoins are doing really amazing, then let's dollarize all of Africa, let's dollarize the whole world. Well, in that sense, you're also handing over sovereignty in a massive way to a part of the world that just you're not from and you're not connected to. So like, where do we hold that tension point between globalization and localization? When you go to countries like Kenya, and actually a whole lot of countries have this, there's this concept of table banking where a small number of 5, 10 women come together, put money on the table, and they lend each other, and then they have interest that comes back to the table, and then they share the interest as profit at the end of the year. Well, does plugging them into the global liquidity pool make sense? I don't think so. That's not what they're asking for. They're just finding ways to collaborate and coordinate easier. So in that context, maybe globalization is not the answer. That's one of the, I think, tension points we got to keep in mind. The other one is speed versus longevity. There are things we do to show results and really see tangible value right away. And sometimes we cut corners. Sometimes we make deals with governments just to get them to sign something without them even understanding. But then governments change. And when governments change, nothing really sticks, right? So how do we really think about building for the long term, but also achieving shorter term results? The other one that touches decentralization as well is user experience versus wanting to decentralize everything. There are some really interesting experiments happening building DeFi at the back end of fintech. So when people are, what they're experiencing in the front end is just regular fintech startup that is lending them money. But at the back end is actually powered by stablecoins and DeFi protocols and liquidity pools and all of that. So that's kind of one of the areas that we're seeing, like maybe reaching massive audiences right away. How do we kind of think about easier user experience and where decentralization lives? But I guess with all of this, the best way to achieve this goal is to show up and partner, because I believe that Africa has a big role to play in this movement that we do. And it can be the saving grace for an industry that is still figuring out where its long-term value proposition is across multiple different verticals. We have all these ideas, we have many prototypes, we're still deep in R&D phase, but we're not there yet, reaching 1 billion people. And you have a whole community and a whole market that is ready for the core principles that we have to offer them. So see you all in Africa. Thank you.